Over the past couple of months, we've talked about voting with a number of people, and recently at a gathering of elected officials and advocates at the Los Angeles Convention Center, I talked about our primary system with Jeremy Gruber. He's with a nonprofit called Open Primaries.
Open primaries let all voters vote. So 26 million Americans are currently shut out of voting in states with closed primaries. Open primaries give them the opportunity to have a say in the primary election. It's critical because our elections have become so uncompetitive in the general election that the primary election is really the election that matters. It's where the real choices are made and where the candidates are really shaped. And independents are now empowered in open primary states to vote in those elections. It's critical. It also empowers legislators because legislators can reach out and talk to all their constituents, not just the partisan few.
But those who are opposed to open primaries worry about sabotage. For example, opposing party members can cross over and select a candidate who may be easier to defeat in the general election.
There's no real evidence that happens. Over 25% of California voters are independents. In California's top two primary, they get to vote. And it frees legislators to work together in a bipartisan fashion. That's why California is passing legislation on intractable issues like climate change, like immigration, issues that Congress can't even touch.
Gruber explains the group's strategy.
We work with states around the country, from Alaska to Florida, through the legislative process, working with state legislators to introduce legislation, to states where we work on ballot initiatives. Right now, for example, in Florida, we have a petition for a ballot initiative to open the primaries.
I asked Gruber whether there's evidence of people switching parties to vote in primary elections.
What we find is that in the top two open primary, like California has, parties no longer run the primaries. All the candidates are on the same ballot. Every voter gets to vote. And you don't see parties both being in charge of our elections as well as competing in them. In states with closed primaries, the parties get to decide who can and cannot vote in the election, despite the fact that the taxpayers pay for the primary elections. And yet the parties want it both ways. They want to be able to say who can and cannot vote, but they also want to be funded by the taxpayers. We don't think that's right. We think every voter should be able to vote in every election, particularly since they're taxpayer funded. And we think that open primaries can help begin to end the political dysfunction and polarization that is currently plaguing our political system.
Gruber says one of his concerns in a closed primary system is voters who identify as independent. They're shut out during election time.
26 million Americans are shut out of voting in closed primary states. That's more people than voted in the 2016 primary. It's a lot of people. It's the biggest act of voter suppression in the country. It doesn't get enough attention, but it's critical. We need every voter to vote. Your vote matters. And right now we're shutting out voters in closed primary states by the millions. It has to end, and it has to end right away.
In fact, Gruber says 42% of Americans are now independent. And among millennial voters, that number jumps to 50%.
I think more and more Americans are tired of politics as usual. They're tired of the political parties being both the gatekeepers of the system as well as competitors in the system. They want the people in power of our elections. We want the people in power of our elections. And that's what really open primaries is all about.